Ahoy, mateys! Welcome to Podcasts of the Caribbean, a podcast covering the world of Pirates of the Caribbean, from the theme parks to the movies and everything in between. My name is Justin Helmer, and I will be your host on this voyage through the Caribbean. It'd be too late to alter course now, mateys. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Podcasts of the Caribbean. This is our first episode of Season 3. Episode 25, which is honestly kind of crazy how it's been 25 episodes already, and I've almost been doing this podcast for a year, so that is pretty crazy. But we're here, Season 3 is here, and we are going to begin covering the fourth Pirates of the Caribbean movie in this episode, and of course that movie is On Stranger Tides. So like I said at the end of Season 2, Season 3 is going to be devoted to covering On Stranger Tides and Dead Men Tell No Tales, maybe like a movie franchise recap and kind of reflection at the end of this season. Still working on that, but for now at least, we're going to be covering On Stranger Tides for a few episodes, and then we'll be covering Dead Men Tell No Tales for a few episodes. So it'll be a very exciting season, kind of going back to how Season 1 was, where we'll be covering a chunk of the movie each episode. So if you didn't go and listen to me covering the first three Pirates of the Caribbean movies back in Season 1, those were episodes 1 through 14, you can go and listen to those now as well. If you missed out on listening to the episodes that I did in Season 2, we branched out into kind of the larger Pirates universe. We covered all the versions of the theme park ride, we covered some comics, and we also covered the Curse of Black Pearl again for the 20th anniversary. So if you missed any of those episodes, make sure to go check those out as well. But we're back. But before we get into On Stranger Tides, we actually have some Pirates of the Caribbean news to talk about. So let's get right into that.
I hear a rumor.
You may have also heard whisperings and rumors.
A message from someone you know.
I always listened like a thief for news of the Black Pearl.
So it's pretty funny because I don't think I've actually had a Pirates news segment since episode 3, I think. Which is kind of funny when you think about it. But we have some Pirates of the Caribbean news to talk about. Nothing too crazy. But we'll start with the biggest piece of Pirates news, which is kind of just an update on what is happening with the next Pirates of the Caribbean movie. So a week or two ago, there was a interview with Craig Mazin, who is potentially writing the screenplay for Pirates 6 with Ted Elliott. And in this interview, he had a comment where Craig says, "We pitched it and thought there's no way they're buying it. It's too weird." And they did. And then he, meaning Ted, wrote a fantastic script, and the strike happened, and everyone's waiting around. So that is the update. So this was a few weeks ago when the writer's strike was still happening. The writer's strike actually just ended right before I recorded this episode. So I guess they're potentially getting back to work on this script. But it seems that Disney bought this script. They're looking into it, and it might be happening. So who knows? That's what we have for Pirates 6 right now. Nothing super promising, but that is the update on Pirates 6. Now we do have some other little tidbits of news to talk about. Let's move over to the theme park world of Pirates of the Caribbean for a second. So a few weeks ago, at Destination D23, which is an event that was held at the Contemporary Resort in Walt Disney World, they revealed a whole bunch of new things for the theme parks. And during this showcase, they revealed that they will be bringing a new Pirates of the Caribbean tavern/lounge to the Magic Kingdom in Walt Disney World. And they didn't really say too much about this. They said it's very early stages, very, development phase. It's probably not coming for a few years at least. But they showed a piece of concept art which features the Barker bird from Pirates of the Caribbean. If you remember back the early days of Pirates of the Caribbean, at the Magic Kingdom, there was this green parrot with a pirate hat and eye patch who would be out on the building outside, and he would be talking and everything. So they're bringing him back for this, which is really cool. But that's pretty much it for this as well. No one knows for sure where it will be. People are thinking that it's going to be replacing Tortuga Tavern, which is the kind of quick service restaurant right across from Pirates of the Caribbean and Magic Kingdom. Maybe it's extending on Tortuga Tavern. Maybe it's going to be next to the ride. No one knows for sure. It's still in the early development stages. But they did say, this is what Disney has to say about it. They say, a new Pirates of the Caribbean themed lounge is coming to Adventureland at Magic Kingdom Park in Florida. This first of its kind experience will extend the story of Pirates of the Caribbean. Imagineers are in the design process now, and more details are coming in the future. So, of course, this is going to be mostly based on the Pirates of the Caribbean theme park ride. Of course, the ride and the movies are pretty much intertwined at this time, so we'll probably have some movie references in this place, but it is more kind of to expand the world of the ride. So, of course, we're not really expecting, this to be something super based on the movies. This is going to be something that's more in line with the ride and the attraction, and maybe some movie references. There'll probably be some movie references in there as well. But that's all we have for the theme park Pirates of the Caribbean news. And now I do want to briefly talk about another piece of news recently. At the beginning of the month, legendary singer Jimmy Buffett passed away. And I'm a big fan of Jimmy Buffett. I've really loved his music for many years now, and the news really hit me hard. But the reason I'm talking about this is because there are some things that Jimmy Buffett inspired that made it into the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. And these are actually confirmed by the writers Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio. So if you remember the boat that Jack sails in on at the beginning of The Curse of Black Pearl, the little dinghy that is sinking, that the canon name of that boat is the Jolly Mon. And the reason it's named the Jolly Mon is because apparently Ted and Terry took the name Jolly Mon from Jimmy Buffett's song Jolly Mon, and they named it the Jolly Mon. So that's pretty cool. And there is also another Jimmy Buffett kind of reference or inspiration in Pirates of the Caribbean, also in Curse of the Black Pearl, which is a reference to the iconic song Margaritaville. And Ted and Terry said that, the reason that Jack gets slapped, all those times, the first time he gets slapped, he says, not sure I deserve that. Then he gets slapped by Giselle, and he says, I may have deserved that. And then when he gets slapped by Anna Maria, he says, that one I deserved. So it's kind of the progression of what he's saying is a homage back to, in the song Margaritaville, Jimmy Buffett first sings, it's nobody's fault, then it could be my fault, and then finally it's my own damn fault. So kind of the progression there is very similar, and Ted and Terry took inspiration from that song for that part in the movie. So rest in peace, Jimmy Buffett. I just wanted to bring that up just to kind of bring those kind of references in if you didn't know that, which is pretty cool. So that's all we have for Pirates of the Caribbean news. Hopefully this Pirates news segment becomes more frequent in the future. But hopefully we get another Pirates news segment before episode 40, because if it took 22 episodes to get another Pirates news segment, let's hope it doesn't take that long for the next one. But anyway, without further ado, let's get into On Stranger Tides. So, Pirates of the Caribbean On Stranger Tides premiered at the Disneyland Resort in California on May 7th, 2011, and it opened to the general public on May 20th, 2011. So even after Gore Verbinski wrapped up his Pirates trilogy in 2007 with At World's End, it wasn't over for Disney. So Disney saw how great the first three movies performed box office-wise, all the money they were making, and they wanted more, obviously, because, why not? So discussions and plans for a fourth movie began soon after At World's End was released. So if you actually, the name On Stranger Tides may ring a bell for fans of pirate literature, because there's a very famous novel by the author Tim Powers that also shares the same name. So Tim Powers' On Stranger Tides novel, which I actually am holding in my hand right now, was released in 1987, and apparently Disney bought the rights to the book way in advance, potentially actually purchasing them in 2006 to 2007. So maybe they were just hoping for more sequels to be immediate right after Outworld's End, which is crazy how they bought them that early. So Terry Rossio, who helped write the script for the first 3 movies, he came back to help write this new movie, and borrowed elements from the book to add into the film. So the novel is still pretty much its own thing. They say it's based on the novel, but it really isn't. The only elements from the book that made it into the movie was having Blackbeard in the movie and the Fountain of Youth, because the book has Blackbeard in it, and the book is about, finding the Fountain of Youth. So the book is still pretty much its own standard thing. Maybe we'll actually talk about the book on a future episode. I still have not read it. I'm holding it in my hands. I actually just bought it, so I'm actually interested in reading it and seeing what other comparisons there may be. But maybe we'll be covering that on a later episode and comparing and contrasting the book and the movie. So just over 2 years after Outworld's End was released, Johnny Depp would announce Pirates of the Caribbean 4 and its subtitle On Stranger Tides at the D23 Expo in 2009. Johnny Depp and other main Pirates actors, such as Jeffrey Rush and Kevin McNally, would also return to reprise their roles as Barbossa and Josh Gibbs, but you may notice that Orlando Bloom and Keira Knightley are absent from this film. This is because they both believe that the Will and Elizabeth storyline was finished, and they also wanted to pursue other projects in their careers. So new characters in this film include Penelope Cruz as Angelica Teach, as well as Ian McShane as the infamous pirate Blackbeard. There are even some returning faces in this film you may recognize. Damien O'Hare, who played Gillette in the first Pirates movie, he returns in this movie, which is pretty cool. And also Greg Ellis, who played Theodore Groves in Pirates 1 and 3, is also in this film as well. There's also plenty of other new characters in this film that we'll cover once we reach them. So without further ado, let's set sail for the Fountain of Youth and begin our adventure into Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides. I'm pretty excited to get into this movie. It's been a while since we've done an episode like this, so I'm excited to get back into it. But again, Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides playing right now, and of course, if you've listened to the other episodes where I covered the first 3 movies, this is going to be pretty much the same format. I'll be reading out the dialogue, talking about characters and things in the background, stuff like that, pretty much analyzing most of what's happening in the movie. What I really do like, though, about the intro for this, so it has, of course, the classic Disney intro, but they have a pirate's flag on the castle, which I think is pretty cool. It's the first time that they edited the castle for a Pirates of the Caribbean movie, because if you notice in Pirates 2 and 3, it doesn't have anything. It's just the standard logo. But I think it's pretty cool they have that pirate's flag on the castle in this. There's also some mermaids that jump out of the water in front of the castle as well. So we open the movie with this fishing boat in the black of night. And there's some fishermen on here. They pull up their net expecting some fish. And when they pull this on deck, they notice that there's a guy in this net. So they drop the net on deck and they see this guy. They think he's dead because, he's in the water. Like, how would he still be alive? So the one guy goes to investigate this man. And he notices that this guy is clutching, like a book on his chest. And the one fisherman says, "Who are you?" And when he tries to grab the book from the guy wakes up. And he's somehow still alive. And that brings us right to Cadiz in Spain, where we have this carriage racing out here, which is very cool. We also have the great like Spanish theme from this movie playing in the background, which I really love. There's some music in this movie that I really, really like. This is one of the themes that I love. But this carriage goes through the gates, and then we see the reveal of, I believe, well, first we have the fisherman bringing the guy in, and then we also have I believe he is, I don't know if he's the king or the prince or whatever. He's not really important because we don't see him at all in the rest of the movie. But they unwrap this guy in front of him, and these fishermen are like, "Your Majesty, caught him up in a fishing net. Sire, he's been telling stories that we believe he's found." And, the guy silences the fisherman, and the old guy gives the Spaniard, or not the Spaniard, the other the Spanish king or prince or whatever, they give him the book, and this old guy just whispers, "Ponce de Leon." And this guy, the fisherman says he found Ponce de Leon's ship, or sailed on it. And then the one fisherman's like, "No, I told you, Ponce de Leon died 200 years ago." And the guy's like, "Aye, but he died searching for something, didn't he?" And, of course, the guy finishes for him, says, "The fountain of youth." And everyone's kind of like, "Oh my God." And this guy turns around to the Spaniard and says, "How soon can you sail?" And the Spaniard just says, "With the tide." And just like that, we have our intro sequence, water droplet, boom, splashes, makes a ripple effect, and we have the name drop Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides. So that's our opening scene for the movie. I think it's a pretty cool scene. Sets the mood a bit, also kind of sets up some of the backstory that we would need. Sets up Ponce de Leon, Fountain of Youth, and also the Spanish, and why they're chasing after it in this movie. But then immediately we're thrust right from Spain over to gloomy London, England, which is honestly pretty awesome to see England, or just to see London in a Pirates of the Caribbean movie. Of course, we've never actually been over in Europe in a Pirates of the Caribbean movie. So it's cool to see London here, because London was such a pretty important place back in, the age of piracy and everything. It's where, pirates would be taken and hung in front of people as a show, which, actually ties into this, because as soon as we come into London, we see this guy holding up a sign, and he says, "Pirates execution today, watch him swing." And, there's all these, like, people selling, like, wooden swords and pirate, like, dolls and all this stuff. Marketing out the occasion, of course. But this one girl is, wants her father to hurry up. We're going to miss the hanging. And the dad's like, "It's not a hanging, dear. It's a trial. The hanging comes this afternoon." And we have a bunch of people going inside of this court building to witness the trial of this pirate. So this one guy opens up this door and says, "Come on, up you get." And he grabs the prisoner. He's got a bag over his head. And the jailer says, "Move along, pirate." Or should I say, "Captain Pirate." And he starts laughing as he pushes this guy along. And we're meant to believe this guy is a pretty important guy. We're going to get the reveal pretty soon. We have this prisoner brought out in front of the jury and the people watching. And we have one of the judges, telling everyone to be quiet. Like, "Quiet, order, now appearing before the court, the notorious and infamous pirate, pillager, and highwayman, Captain Jack Sparrow." And then get the bag pulled off this guy's head, and we reveal that it's none other than Joshua Gibbs. Definitely not Jack Sparrow. But obviously these people have no idea. And everyone, is kind of like sneering and, sneering at Gibbs. And Gibbs like, "I told you, the name's Gibbs, Joshua Gibbs. How many times?" And then he's interrupted, "Proceeding over these trials, all rise and attend. The Right Honorable Justice Smith." And then we have this big judge. He comes out and begins to walk over to his seat. And Gibbs looks up as all the judges kind of bow when, this guy's coming up. And then we see this judge gets slipped a big wad of cash. So we can see something is going on here. And then we see this judge sit down and he looks up and says, "Now, what do we have here?" And we find out that this judge is none other than Captain Jack Sparrow. So, of course, now we have Jack and Gibbs here. I also do like how, it's Justice Smith. For some reason, Jack and the name Smith just, have such a crazy connection. Because, anytime Jack is, using a different identity, his name is just Smith. In the first movie, it's Smith. It's always Smith for some reason. Does anyone else notice that? It's kind of funny, actually. But we notice it's Jack, and Gibbs also realizes it's Jack, and he says, "Jack?" And then he gets slapped on the head, and Jack's like, "Not necessary. You were saying?" And Gibbs is like, "Jack Sparrow is not my name. My name is Joshua Gibbs." And then Jack's like, "Is that so? It says Jack Sparrow here." And Gibbs is like, "I told him I'm not Jack Sparrow, who I would be happy to identify to the court if it would so help my case." And then Jack's like, "I think that would be a poor defense. Unless you want to be bludgeoned again like a harp seal." And then Jack's like, "The prisoner claims of being innocent to being Jack Sparrow. How do you find?" And the foreman stands up. He's like, "No trial, but we aren't here to examine the evidence." And then Jack's like, "Foreman, your finding. Guilty?" And the foreman's like, "Guilty verdict means I'll hang." And then we see, all the people cheering and sneering up in the upper level, like, "Hang him, string him up." And then Jack looks back over at the foreman, and the foreman's just like, "Guilty." And then Gibbs is like, "That's not fair." But Jack just says, "Joshua Gibbs, the crime of which you've been found guilty of is being innocent of being Jack Sparrow. I hereby commute your sentence and order that you be imprisoned for the remainder of your miserable, moribund, mutton-chopped life." And then everyone's confused because they were expecting a pirate to be hanged, and they're like all mad. And Jack hits the gavel, stands up, and begins to walk away. All the people are like, "Balderdash, string him up, hang him high." But then Gibbs gets taken away, and one of the judges says, "Means shall be arranged to transport this prisoner to the Tower of London." And there's, people throwing food at these judges and everything. I think this is a great opening scene. I think it's a great funny scene with Jack and Gibbs. Great opening scene. But Jack, he walks away. He kind of gets all the white coloring out of his beard, throws the wig off, takes off the clothes, and he opens this door and throws the robe back on the real Justice Smith. And he's like, "Thanks very much." And then we go outside to this coach that's waiting with this driver. Looks over. Jack grabs his hat off this horse's head. Jack, winks at this pirate who is driving the carriage. And Gibbs gets thrown in the back of this carriage. And I love how Jack just kind of sneaks in line behind him and gets thrown in there as well. And they close the doors on the carriage. Carriage begins to drive away. And Gibbs is like, "Hell's teeth, now we're both headed for prison." And Jack's like, "Not to worry, I've paid off the driver. 10 minutes, we'll be outside London town, horses waiting. Tonight, we make for the coast. Then it's just a matter of finding a ship." And then Gibbs is like, "All part of the plan, yes?" And Jack's like, "Exactly. I arrived in London town just this morning to rescue one Joshua Gibbs from one appointment with the gallows. Seeing as how you're still alive, I say it's all been very successful thus far." And then Jack's like, "What's happened to you, Gibbs? I thought you were employed elsewhere, otherwise engaged." And then Gibbs is like, "Aye, but I always listened like a thief, and nobody's seen where she might next make port. Then I hear a rumor. Jack Sparrow's in London with a ship and looking for a crew. And Jack's like, not. And Gibbs is like, that's what I've heard. Fact is, you're signing up men tonight. Pub called the captain's daughter. And Jack grabs the flask of rum from Gibbs, like, I am not. And then Gibbs is like, well, I thought it a bit odd. But then again, you've never been the most predictable of sorts. And then Jack's like, tell me something. There is another Jack Sparrow out there sullying my good name? And Gibbs is like, an imposter. And Jack's like, indeed. But an imposter with a ship. And in need of a crew. Which, as fate would have it, so am I. And then Gibbs is like, what about you, Jack? Last I heard, you were hell-bent on finding the Fountain of Youth. Any luck? And he grabs the Mao Kun map from inside of Jack's jacket, which, of course, if you remember, the Mao Kun did have the location of the Fountain of Youth on there. If you remember from the end of At World's End, Jack took it from Barbossa, but Gibbs grabs it and begins to open it up, and he's like, any luck? And Jack grabs the Mao Kun back from Gibbs, and Jack says, circumstances arose and forced a compelling insight regarding discretion and valor. And then Gibbs is like, meaning you gave up. And Jack's like, I did not. I'm as bent as ever. Hellishly so. I shall taste those waters, Master Gibbs. Mark my words. And then, boom, carriage stops, and, Gibbs and Jack look around, and Jack's like, oh, short trip. Jack goes to open the doors of the carriage, and they get out, and they realize they're surrounded by royal soldiers. And Gibbs is like, all part of the plan, yes? And Jack turns around to look at Gibbs, and he just gets head-butted in the back of his head with the musket, and he's just like, no. And then we flash forward to Jack getting brought into Buckingham Palace to speak with someone of very high important status in the government here in London. He's clapped in irons, and he's shackled to this chair in front of this big, large dining room table. And he's just in there alone for a little while here. So he looks up, kind of planning potential routes of escape. So we see, the balcony up above, we see the window, and these will all be very important very soon. So you want to pay attention to where he looks, because that's actually, places will be, I won't spoil anything too soon, but of course if you've seen the movie, obviously you know what happens. But Jack looks in front of him and looks at the table. He sees the cream puff on the plate, and he's kind of trying to move his chair ever so slowly over to the table. And he finally gets close enough to reach out, but as soon as that happens, the portrait on the wall kind of opens up like a secret door, and he kind of springs back, he slams his foot into the table, and the cream puff drops off, and he kicks it up with his boot, and it kind of like gets stuck on the chandelier above him. And we see a bunch of soldiers coming out, and then we see all of these people kind of bringing and setting out food on this table, and we see none other than this very high status character who comes and sits down in the chair across from Jack, and we see the reveal of King George, which is honestly pretty cool as well to have him in a Pirates movie. So the one guy is like, you are Jack Sparrow. And then Jack's like, there should be a captain in there somewhere. And of course, that's one of Jack Sparrow's most iconic lines, I feel like, at this point. This was also a line that was heavily featured in the trailers, I remember. But King George is like, I've heard of you, and you know who I am. And Jack's like, face is familiar. Have I threatened you before? So a nice little callback to Curse of Black Pearl when he says that to Will in the blacksmith shop. And the one guy says, you are in the presence of George Augustus, Duke of Brunswick-Lundberg, Arch-Treasurer and Prince-Elector of the Holy Roman Empire, King of Great Britain and Ireland, and of you. And Jack's like, does it ring a bell? And King George is like, I am informed you have come to London to procure a crew for your ship. I love how he talks to it. It's so great. And then I love how Jack's like, vicious rumor, not true. And then King George's like, then you lied to me when you told me you were Jack Sparrow. And Jack's like, I am Jack Sparrow, but I am not here to procure a crew. That is someone else. And King George is like, someone else named Jack. You've brought me the wrong wastrel. Find the proper one and dispose of this imposter. And then Jack's like, no, wait a minute. Hang on a minute. I'm Jack Sparrow, the one and only. And I am in London to procure a crew. And I love he's wrangling his chains as well, making this whole ruckus of sound. And King George's like, to procure a crew. To undertake a voyage to the fountain. Jack's like, what? And then like King George's like, will someone please remove these infernal chains? And Jack holds his hands up as the soldiers kind of take the chains off of him. And the one guy says, we know you're in possession of a map. So confiscate the map and to the gallows with him. And Jack's like, what? And then, King George is like, have you a map? And then he reaches into his jacket to grab the Mao Kun, and he realizes it's not there. So we kind of get the implication that Gibbs took it, because who else would have taken it? Gibbs took the Mao Kun from Jack. So Jack's like, no. And the guy's like, where is it? And Jack's like, truth? Lost it. Quite recently, in fact. And King George says, I have a report. The Spanish have located the Fountain of Youth. And, Jack, in the meantime, is kind of looking over all this food on the table. And then we have this great line from King George that I have to do the whole thing because it's just one of my favorite lines in this whole movie. But I will not have some melancholy Spanish monarch, a Catholic, gain eternal life. And it's just so, I just love how he's like banging his hand on the table while he says it. It's so great. And the one guy says, you do know the way to the fountain. And then Jack's like, of course I do. Look at me. And then the one guy's like, you could guide an expedition. And then we see this whole time, Jack's kind of walking around the table. He grabs a handkerchief off the table and he goes behind his chair and he tilts it in this very, very, perfect, specific position. I love this next line where he's like, where Jack's like, with your permission, your hiney, you will be providing then a ship. And then he throws the handkerchief behind him and it lands on the ground. And Jack's like, and a crew. And then King George just says, and a captain. And we go over to this door that opens up and we see this very mysterious figure with a peg leg who walks out into the dining room with everyone else. And he bows down and he comes up and we see it's none other than Captain Hector Barbossa, back again, and of course played by Jeffrey Rush. But we see, of course, Barbossa looks very different from the last time we saw him. He's got a whole privateer outfit on, he's got a wig on, got the makeup on too. And Barbossa just says, afternoon, sire. And he looks at Jack, and Jack looks at him, and they both lock eyes. And you see Jack has a very smug look on his face. Barbossa begins to hobble over to the table, because of course he has a peg leg now. How'd he lose his leg? We'll all find out in due time. But Barbossa says, if I may be so bold, why is that man not in chains? He must be manacled at once. And King George is like, the center of my palace, hardly. I just love how this guy just says I love how just pompous he says the lines. It's great. It's just so much fun. But Jack just says, Hector, how nice to see a fellow pirate make good of himself. And then Barbossa says, pirate? Nay, privateer, on a sanctioned mission under the authority and protection of the crown. And he kind of like touches his wig. And Jack says, as may be, but first, what has become of my beloved pearl? And then Barbossa just says, I lost the pearl as I lost me leg. And he brings his peg leg up on the table. And then Jack just says, lost the pearl? And Barbossa says, I defended her mightily, but she sunk nonetheless. And then we have this brief second, and you can see the look on Jack's face, and he begins to jump on the table and tries to get at Barbossa. And these two guards grab him and hold him back and restrain him. And Jack just says one of my favorite Jack Sparrow lines, and he says, if that ship be sunk properly, you should be sunk with it. And this moment is so good. I love it so much because one, it shows how much Jack cares for the Black Pearl. And two, he also, he says this line, if that ship be sunk properly, you should be sunk with it. Because, the captain, must go down with his ship. But we will come to find out that something happened to the Black Pearl and it didn't really go down in the traditional way. But I love this moment. I love when, Barbossa says that and Jack tries to jump at him immediately. It's like he just goes feral. Like he goes into like this crazed mode. And it's such a good moment because, Jack Sparrow doesn't have many serious moments where he's like very cold and like says exactly what he means. And like, this is one of those moments where he does, and it's one of my favorite Jack Sparrow moments. But immediately after he says this, King George interrupts and says, Captain Barbossa, each second we tarry, the Spanish outdistance us. I have every confidence you will prevail and be rewarded with your high station you so desire. And then Barbossa's like, to serve doth suffice, sire. And then Jack just says, you, sir, have and Jack just says, you, sir, have stooped. And then Barbossa just says, Jack, our sands be all but run. Where is the harm in joining the widden side? And you do meet to nicer class of person. And then Jack just says, I understand everything. Except that wig. And he elbows the two guards behind him. He looks up at the cream puff on the thing. He hits the rifles, boom, bayonet, shoots the rope off the chandelier, begins to swing. He hits the two guys off with the bayonet, throws the food off of the table as he's running along the table, making a mess of everything. Jumps off, does a cartwheel off the back of the chair, throws the chair out the window. He looks behind him, the one guard's running at him. He gives him the rope. The guy slides on the handkerchief out the window, pulls the rope down. Jack slides up onto the roof, and then he jumps on the chandelier as it begins to swing. Of course, we have, he's a pirate playing in the background here. And Jack grabs onto the balcony, grabs the cream puff, takes a bite of it, kind of like, salutes his way out, and the guards begin to burst through the door to begin to chase him down. And King George is like, he escaped, and then Barbossa's like, leave it to me, sire. And I love how King George is kind of like, gives them like a thumbs up. But, whew, I just did that whole thing without like pausing or taking a second a breath to get through it. But man, what a great little scene there. That was also one of the clips that Disney released before this movie came out. And I remember, back in 2011, watching that clip. I just watched the clip. I instantly watched it again and again. And I must have watched that clip like 100 times. Because, it's funny because when the guards burst through the door, that's when the clip ended and it kind of faded to black. So whenever I watch the movie and they burst through the door, I always expect the movie to fade to black. But it doesn't, and I always get confused because I always keep thinking back to that clip. Because the clip starts with Barbossa saying, Jack, our sands be all but run, and blah, 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 and it goes on to that fade to black. And that scene is just so ingrained in my head because I've watched it so many times. And I guess we'll take a second here to kind of talk about, me anticipating this movie back in 2011, because it was 4 years after At World's End came out, between At World's End and this movie, and I was just so excited for this movie. I was so excited. I was 9 years old when this movie came out. It actually came out on my dad's birthday, which is kind of funny. But I was 9 years old when this movie came out. I was in fourth grade. Fourth grade or third? I can't remember how school works. But I just remember every day I was just like, oh my God, I can't wait for Pirates of the Caribbean, Australia Ties to come out. I had so many theories. Like, when you're like very young and you just like theorize everything. I'll share this with you now. I feel really weird sharing this, but my big theory going into On Stranger Tides was that Philip Swift, who we'll get to meet probably in the next episode, that Philip Swift was actually Will Turner's son, because of course we didn't know that his name was Henry yet. We didn't know that his name was Henry until Dead Men Tell No Tales came out. But like, for some reason, I always thought that Philip Swift was going to be Will Turner's son. And like, there's a moment at the end of the movie where, Serena takes Philip down into the water. I'm like, oh, she's going to take Philip to go see his dad. Like, I just think back to that and I just cringe so hard, because like, I cannot believe I actually believe that was actually going to be true. I guess I was just trying to cope with like Will Turner not being in the movie. And I just wanted, like, the bloodline to continue. Even though I knew his name was Philip Swift. Like, I don't know why I ever thought that. I just think back to that, and I just cringe so much. But, man, like, I was so into this movie when it came out. And, of course, now it is my least favorite Pirates of the Caribbean movie. But I still do enjoy it. Like, there are some moments in this film that I don't like, and I feel like the movie as a whole is pretty alright. And there's some really great like pieces of gold in this movie. There's some great scenes in this film. But there's just other stuff that kind of takes away from it, and it doesn't feel as polished, or like it doesn't feel like it's the same level as the first three movies. Obviously because Gore Verbinski did not direct this one. I forgot to say that. Rob Marshall actually directed this film. So, of course, Gore Verbinski, he directed the first three films, and he did not come back for this film because he finished his trilogy, and he moved on to other projects in his career, and also he didn't want to make another Pirates of the Caribbean movie because, it was over for him. But, of course, Disney wanted to make another one, and Rob Marshall stepped in, and I do have to admit, the way this movie was filmed was still, on the level of, the Dead Man's Chest and At World's End shoot. And it's pretty crazy how On Stranger Tides is one of the most expensive movies ever made. It's actually in fourth place. It looks like Force Awakens is the most expensive, and then we have Jurassic World and Star Wars Rise of Skywalker. I don't know if that's completely up to date. I'm just looking at this on Wikipedia, but On Stranger Tides is one of the most expensive movies ever made. And that's because they literally did the same thing. They did location shoots. They shot on location. They shot on the water for ship scenes. They shot on location when they could. It wasn't just in front of a blue screen all the time. And that's one of the things that, as much as I do enjoy Dead Men Tell No Tales, they filmed so much of Dead Men Tell No Tales in front of a blue screen. Like, it is so apparent. They did not even film on the water at all, which is annoying. But at that point, movies like this had just gotten so expensive, and you can tell with how much more expensive this film was than the other films. But they shot this movie on location as much as they could, and they brought a lot of the crew back. Like Peter Cohen, he was back. Darius Wolski, director of photography, he was back for this film. So they had so much of the original crew back too. And of course, Terry Rossio was there as well. So they had so much of the original crew, which kind of gives this movie like an inkling of the first three, but there's just kind of like that feeling that it doesn't recapture. And, if you think about the franchise as a whole, I call On Stranger Tides the most kind of like side quest movie of the whole franchise. Because at least with Dead Men Tell No Tales, you have Henry Turner, you have Karina, you have people that are progressing the main story, the main characters' stories are still progressing. But in this film, it's just Jack Sparrow. Jack Sparrow is the main character in this movie. And it's pretty much a Jack Sparrow side quest. Even though it has elements that will become very important in the franchise as it develops, it is the most side quest. It's like a side quest that gives you like consequences for the main story. Like that's how it feels. But despite all that, I still really do enjoy this movie. It is my least favorite of the Pirates franchise, but it's still enjoyable. And like, how can you not watch a Pirates of the Caribbean movie and not have a good time doing so? Like, no matter what, you will still enjoy watching a Pirates of the Caribbean movie. Like, that's the thing I love about this franchise so much, is that they're just good, fun movies. Like they may not, like the sequels may not be as good as the first three, but like, they're still fun to watch. At least to me. Hopefully they are to you as well, but enough of that tangent. Let's get back into the movie. But Jack is still escaping. He kind of distracts this guard by kind of tipping his hat over to kind of draw attention. Jack hides behind this piano as this guy runs away. Or not the piano, it's a desk. But conveniently, the guy that runs away was actually the guy that was holding Jack's sword and pistol. So conveniently, Jack gets his stuff back. And he begins to try to make his escape from the palace. He runs up these stairs and gets to this window. And he opens up the window and he looks down at the road under him. And he's like, how am I going to get out of this one? But he looks over and sees this kind of like, sees this rope that is adjoining these two buildings. And the guards kind of run up to where Jack opened that window and they look out and they don't see him. And then one guy's like, find him. And then we get this reveal that Jack is hiding like right behind like the drapes on this rope. And he slips. And the guard sees Jack's legs dangling from the bottom, and he kind of blows on the whistle, alerting the guards. And Jack's trying to get off of this thing. One of the tassels fell off, and this kid picks up and looks up. And the other guard comes out the other window and starts chopping it down. Then he brings his sword through it. The rope comes down, and Jack is thrust right into this lady's carriage. And we see that this lady is actually played by Judi Dench. This is a great cameo. It's actually it's a whole like 3-minute behind the scenes featurette about this cameo with Judi Dench. Of course, if you don't know who Judi Dench is, she is a very well-known, very respected actress. Why she was in the movie, I don't know. I don't know like why Judi Dench was in the movie. Like why, like how'd they get the idea? Like, oh, let's get Judi Dench. Like, but it's still cool to see her in this movie. But Jack looks at her and he goes to like kiss her ear. And this lady like is like so enjoying it, and Jack begins to climb out onto the top of the carriage. And the lady's like, "Is that it?" And Jack gets on top of the carriage. The lady kind of touches her ear where Jack kissed it, and she realizes her earring is missing. And we get the reveal that Jack has the earring in his mouth, and he kind of just like sucks it down and like eats it. Like he just ate that? Like what? It's so funny. But then we have this great carriage chase, which I really do love. It is very, very cool, but the music I feel like is the music in this scene and also some other scenes in this movie is it is good, and obviously Hans Zimmer also came back to score this film, along with Rodrigo and Gabriela, who are this like Spanish duo who added kind of some like Spanish twinges into the music, which I do appreciate and I do love, and I do love the new themes of music that are made for this movie. But if you've watched this movie, you will notice that many of the action scenes in this film share or just rip music pretty much right from like the first three films. Like this whole carriage chase scene has music that is just like, it's stuff from Pirates 1, Pirates 2, and Pirates 3. Like it's kind of weird. Like, why isn't there like more new themes? And that's like, as much as I love the score for this film, like Palm Tree Escape, I love, but like, there's so much reused music, and I don't want to like like hate on Hans Zimmer for repurposing music because like you cannot hate on Hans Zimmer. Hans Zimmer is like too good, but like, why is there so much recycled music? Like that's one of the things that's always bugged me. Maybe it like doesn't bug other people as much as it does me, but like the good thing I like about Dead Men Tell No Tales is that it has a lot more original music. Like it has a whole new Jack Sparrow theme, Karina's theme, and Salazar's theme, and all kinds of new themes. It's a lot of really new music. But On Stranger Tides, I feel like has no real musical identity besides the parts where it has the kind of the Spanish twinges of music that come in. The new themes for On Stranger Tides, like the Spanish theme and like Angelica's theme and Blackbeard's theme, very, very cool. But everything else, there's like no other real original music. Even the Mermaid's theme, as good as it is, for some reason to me, it sounds so similar to the Davy Jones Locker theme from At World's End, which is kind of weird. Like I guess it makes sense because it's kind of like an otherworldly, like the mermaids are an otherworldly thing. But I kind of wish that there was more original music, and I hope it isn't coming across that I'm hating on this movie. I do enjoy this movie, but it is my least favorite, of course. But the whole point of this is that I'm pointing out some faults of the movie and also pointing out the good things in the movie. But that's what's one of my biggest gripes with the movie, I think. Is just I kind of wanted there to be more original music. I didn't really notice it until I kind of rewatched it recently. But yeah, it just kind of bugs me. I just wish there was more original music. But let's get on with this carriage chase. Enough Debbie Downer. But we have this great scene of Jack, between the carriages. He has one foot on each carriage, and he jumps to this one. And he begins to hop from like carriage to carriage. And we have this great kind of new version of the Jack Sparrow theme that plays during this part of the scene, which I really love. It's a great new version of it. Where he jumps on this board that people are carrying. He steps on this guy's hat onto this carriage that is holding a ton of coal. And then he jumps into the driver's seat and he literally throws the driver out, pushes him off as he notices the soldiers are chasing behind him on their horses, shooting pistols at him. One of the soldiers shoots one of the lanterns, which ignites all the coal in the cart. And some of the coals begin to fall out of the cart as Jack kind of smashes into things, leaving a whole kind of hot trail of burning coals, which I think is really cool. But he goes to these streets, he drops more and more coals, and kind of like delays these guards a little bit more as he's trying to get away. And then we see the cart kind of go off screen, and the guards chase after it, and we see Jack is holding on to the captain's daughter sign. And also, how they not notice he's just chilling up there? And he drops off, and he's kind of smiles as he has completed yet another miraculous Jack Sparrow escape. But behind him, he hears this guy say "filthy pirate," and Jack's face just goes blank, and he's like preparing to be shot. And then he hears the gunshot go off, and he notices he didn't get shot, but we see the guard behind him falls to the ground. And then Jack turns around, and we see who has shot him? Edward Teague in the flesh. And Edward Teague just says, "Hello, Jackie." And Jack just says, "Hello, Dad." And Captain Teague is back. How did he make it to London? It's never explained. But we go inside the captain's daughter, where we see a bunch of people just, falling asleep drunk or, making out with these ladies. But Captain Teague and Jack are sitting down at a table, and Teague just says, "I heard you're putting together a crew." And Jack says, "If enough people keep saying it, it must be true." And Teague says, "I heard you're headed for the fountain." And Jack's like, "Have you been there?" And then Teague's like, "Does this face look like it's been to the Fountain of Youth?" And then Jack's like, "Depends on the light." And then Teague's like, "Son, the fountain." there'll be items required for the profane ritual. 2 chalices. And then Jack's like, on the map there was a chalice. And then Teague's like, 2 silver. From the Ponce de Leon ship, you'll need both. And then Jack's like, 4. And then Teague's like, the ritual. Don't be a fool, Jackie. Find out every detail before you set sail. And then Jack's like, oh, set sail, love to. But for that, I need a ship. And then Teague kind of gestures over. He's like, those folk over there, they have a ship. They're signing up sailors right now. And Jack kind of turns around and we see, people signing up on the other side of the captain's daughter. And Teague just says, and one last thing, Jackie. The fountain will test you. Mark my words. And Jack and Teague kind of clink their cups. They take a swig. And Jack puts his cup down, turns around, and then turns back to look at his dad. And Captain Teague is just gone. He literally just vanishes out of thin air. Where did he go? Like, is Captain Teague like a ghost in this world? Like, how did he get to London? And also, how does he just disappear? And also, how does he know so much about the ritual for the Fountain of Youth? Like, this is also something that, like, is never explained. Like, he says, like, yeah, the fountain will test you. And he, like, knows all this stuff about the ritual and the chalices, all this stuff. How does he know that if he's never been to the Fountain of Youth? He's never engaged with the Fountain of Youth? Like, it's not explained. I feel like he's only there for, like, a plot device to just give Jack all the details he needs to know. And for the audience to know as well. Which is just weird. Like, he just comes out of nowhere. Also, I guess they somehow got Keith Richards back to play Teague again, which is pretty cool. You get some more Teague screen time. But also, it's weird how he's in London and not a Shipwreck Cove, because, like, isn't, like, the Keeper of the Code supposed to just guard the code at all times? That's also never really explained. There's so many things in Pirates of the Caribbean that just are never really explained too well, but I just want to know how Teague just vanishes out of thin air. Like, it's really weird. But then we go over to this pirate who's playing this instrument, and his name's Scrum. Of course, we're introduced to Scrum, who's played by Stephen Graham. And of course, Scrum is in this movie, and he also comes back in Dead Men Tell No Tales. But Jack puts a knife to Scrum's throat, and Jack says, I hear you've been recruiting a crew. And then Scrum's like, aye, that is. Jack Sparrow be putting together a modest venture. And then Jack, like, stands up and he's like, Jack stands up and Scrum kind of takes a look at him. He's like, you got some nerve, ain't ya? Coming in here dressed like that. And then Scrum's like, what are you, some kind of imposter? And then Jack's like, have you any idea who I am, mate? And then Scrum just starts laughing, and he's like, oi, muckers, there's a bloke here what's forgotten his own name. And everyone starts laughing. I just love that moment. But Jack kind of looks over at this guy who's coming out of this room. He's like, lads, I'm sailing with Sparrow. Who'll buy a sailor a drink? And kind of walks away, and Jack notices in the reflection, he sees his own reflection in the door frame, but it's not him. It's a different Jack Sparrow. So he goes inside the room to investigate, and he sees from behind this pillar, Jack Sparrow walks in front of him, cloaked in shadow. So now we have Jack Sparrow and the imposter Jack Sparrow, and they're about to have a duel. And this is such a great concept, and it's also one of my favorite scenes from this movie. This is such a cool idea of having Jack fight a mirror image of himself. Because it's kind of like that thing where, like Jack always gets out of fights by improvising and doing something that someone doesn't know about. But if he's fighting himself, how can he really do that? Like, that's also, like, how does Jack win in a fight with himself when Jack and the imposter will do the same things to win the fight? Like, it's just such a cool, interesting concept, and I do love how we did get to see this in the film. It's such a cool scene. And I should also bring up that the stunt coordinator for On Stranger Tides But it's another familiar face who we've talked about on the podcast before. But it's George Marshall Rugi, who did the stunts on Pirates 1, 2, and 3. He came back for the stunts on this film too, which is just really cool. And that's why a lot of the fights in this movie are really, really fun. It's George Rugi, and he's just so good at what he does. But Jack draws his sword, and so does the imposter Jack. And I love how the imposter Jack Sparrow is just continuously cloaked in shadow for most of the fight, so you don't see who the imposter really is. And I think it's this whole fight just works out so well. It's so cool because you have to have the light not hit the imposter and have the light on Jack, so you can see Jack, but you don't see the imposter. You just see two Jack Sparrows. Like, it's just such a cool fight scene. But Jack says, "You've stolen me, and I'm here to take myself back." But they begin to fight. They begin to cross blades, and they begin to they both kind of hide behind this pillar. And I love how Jack begins to look left, and the other Jack looks left from behind the pillar. And they turn to the other side, and they both see each other, and they both start fighting. They jump up on the spit in the middle of the room, and then we have this great little kind of like standoff where they both walk around the spit. Jack puts his hand up and kind of like, like touch his beard, and the imposter does it at the same time, and Jack's like, "Stop doing that." And then they begin to fight again, and Jack gets his sword stuck on the pig roast, but they begin to fight. There's the barrels next to them. There's a really cool area as well, kind of harkens back to the blacksmith duel a little bit, which is how the area is constructed. But we have this great shot from up top of the rafters, looking down at them, and Jack begins to run up this, or the imposter Jack Sparrow, sorry, I'm getting confused. The imposter Jack Sparrow runs up this thing, trips Jack by sending down a barrel. Jack dodges another incoming barrel, and he realizes the imposter Jack is going up to the rafters, so he takes this small little elevator to get up there as well. And Jack Sparrow has finally gotten up to the rafters to catch up with the imposter Jack Sparrow. Then we have this great fight on the rafters, also kind of harkening back to the blacksmith duel, where they're kind of balancing on the rafters. Imposter Jack hits this thing, tries to hit Jack with this kind of pulley that swings in front of him, but Jack grabs on the pulley and swings across and kicks the imposter Jack Sparrow down. And Jack's kind of they're both balancing on these barrels at the end of the room, and they begin to kind of topple, and both of them kind of fall back down to the ground. Jack does a roll, and we have this great kind of final part of the battle where they both just keep slashing at each other with the swords. They take a second. The imposter Jack steps on Jack's foot, and does this really cool move, where it like flips around and just like does this really awesome move and kind of points their sword at Jack. And at this point, Jack's like, he knows who it is. And he says, "Only one person alive knows that move." And then Jack does one last move. He grabs the imposter and kisses the imposter Jack Sparrow. And then we get the reveal, and Jack just says, "Always wanted to do that." And we get the reveal that this is none other than Angelica, who is impersonating Jack Sparrow. So Jack says, "Hello, Angelica," and he pulls off the fake facial hair. And of course, this is Angelica, played by Penelope Cruz, who is very good. I love Angelica's character, and I really wish that we could have seen more of her. Hopefully, we do end up seeing more of her at some point. It probably won't happen, but like, her character is very, very cool, and I like her dynamic with Jack a lot. But Angelica says, "Hello, Jack. Are you impressed? I think I almost killed you once or twice there." And Jack says, "I'm touched at this most sincerest form of flattery." And he kind of like throws off the hat off her head, and she's pulling off the mustache and everything. But Jack's like, "But why?" And she pulls off the Jack Sparrow wig. But also, this begs the question: how did she get a replica of Jack Sparrow's outfit? Like, did she like time travel to like 2007, buy like a Jack Sparrow Halloween costume, and come back? Like, Where did she get a perfect copy of Jack Sparrow's outfit, like down to the beads in his like braids and like his bandana, his jacket, his whole like outfit? How did she manage to get this? Did she manage to get like a perfect copy of his stuff, like back when she knew him a lot? Like, how did she get a perfect copy of Jack Sparrow's outfit? The world will never know. But Angelica continues, and she says, "You were the only pirate I thought I would pass for." And Jack's like, "That is not a compliment." And then Angelica says, "Don't worry, Jack. I forgave you a long time ago." And then Jack's like, "For what? For leaving you?" And then Angelica's like, "Recall that I left you." And then Jack's like, "A gentleman always allows a lady to maintain her fictions." And then Angelica's like, "Look, Sparrow, as long as my sailors get their money, they're willing to put up with any number of peculiarities." And Jack's like, "Ah, there is one peculiarity, which with I will not put up with. I will be impersonated as captain, nothing less." And then Angelica's like, "Well, for that you need a ship. And as it turns out, I have one." And then Jack's like, "I could use a ship." And Angelica says, "I hear tell you've been to the fountain." And Jack's like, there'd be a lot of hear telling going on these days." And Angelica says, "The fountain of youth." And Jack says, "The fountain of youth. Dearest Angelica, fret not. You still have a few usable years left." And then Angelica kind of laughs, like, "Always so charming." "You didn't answer me." And then Jack's like, "Huh?" Like, "Aye, regarding the fountain. Waste of time, really." But Scrum butts in, and he's like, "Milady, I see unseamanlike fellows of an officious-looking nature. And like wretched pirates, find them, maggots," and all the soldiers are kind of barging into the captain's daughter now. And Scrum closes the door. And Angelica's like, "Friends of yours?" And then Jack's like, "I may have unintentionally slighted some king." And Angelica's like, "Yeah, you haven't changed." And Jack's like, implying the need. And Angelica's like, "Yes. You betrayed me. You seduced me and you used me. I was innocent of the ways of men." I love how Jack's like gawked like this whole time, like, "You demonstrated a lot of technique for someone I supposedly corrupted." And then Scrum's like, "Imminent danger here now, milady." You know, the guards are bursting on the door at this point. And then Angelica is like, "I was ready to take my vows. And you? What were you doing in a Spanish convent anyway?" And then Jack's like, "Mistook it for a brothel. Honest mistake." But the door bursts open, and these guards begin to come into the room. Scrum kind of hides behind some crates. And we have this other great battle that opens up with Angelica, Jack, and these British soldiers. So as they kind of fight them off here, I love how Scrum's kind of watching it, and he runs up. We had some great action from Jack and Angelica. Some more soldiers burst in from another door. And Angelica's like, "We are at a disadvantage." And then Jack's like, "Speak for yourself. Unlike some who pretend to be, but cannot, in fact, hold a candle to, I am Captain Jack Sparrow." And he slashes his barrel, and all this rum kind of, or wine, whatever it is, kind of starts bursting everywhere, and it kind of like makes all these guys start slipping up, blinds them. They slip on the floor, kind of takes them all out pretty easily. Another classic Jack Sparrow move. He kind of bursts open this barrel and gets some wine in his mouth before Angelica grabs him. But they're cornered by all these soldiers at this point. And Jack and Angelica look at each other. And Jack ducks, and Angelica hits this lever right over Jack Sparrow, and they both fall through the floor through this hidden trap door. And they both swim away as the soldiers kind of look down and wonder where they went. And they surface outside of the captain's daughter in some of the canals. And Jack's like, how can you say I used you?" And then Angelica's like, "You know exactly how." And then Jack's like, "I know, but how can you say it?" But they pull themselves out of the water, and Angelica's like, "So what is it?" And Jack's like, "What is what?" And then Angelica's like, "About the fountain. What do you know?" And Jack's like, "You don't happen to be in possession of 2 silver chalices circa Ponce de Leon? And then Angelica's like, no. And Jack's like, thought not. And then Angelica's like, why? And then Jack's like, I hear stories, rumors. You are, of course, aware of the ritual. And Angelica's like, yes, I am. And Jack's like, what is it? What is required? And then, out of nowhere, Jack gets hit by a dart in the back of his neck. And he pulls it out and looks at it. And before he kind of fades away, Angelica just says, a mermaid, Jack. And Jack just falls down, falls asleep. And then we see the reveal behind him of the quartermaster zombie. And Angelica kind of smiles before we pivot to our next scene, which is outside of this fort. And we see that Gibbs is being taken he's about to be executed. He's about to be hung. And we see he's being pulled through this area where all these other people are hung on these spokes. And Gibbs is like, it's a life sentence, not death, life. And then we see Barbossa comes out as well, holding a long rope. And Gibbs sees him, and he's like, Barbossa. And then Barbossa's like, thank you, gentlemen. And then he throws this rope to Gibbs, and he's like, I trust you can tie a noose. And then Gibbs is like, that's a hard thing, forcing a man to twist his own hanging rope. And he throws the rope back on Barbossa. And then Barbossa's like, you must lie in your bed the way you made it. And then he throws this rope to one of the officers right behind him, who we see is Theodore Groves. And we also see, standing next to Groves on his right, we see Gillette. They're both back, which is really, really cool. Because Gillette, he hasn't been in any movies since Curse of the Black Pearl. So it was really cool seeing him again. And of course, Groves was in Pirates 1 and Pirates 3. He wasn't named, actually, until Pirates 3. If you watch the credits of Curse of the Black Pearl, you'll see Greg Ellis is credited as lieutenant or Navy lieutenant or something like that. He doesn't actually have a name in Pirates 1. But Gibbs is like, what's happened to you? To Barbossa, and Barbossa's like, where be Jack Sparrow? And Gibbs is like, he escaped. And then Barbossa's like, I'm on a tight schedule, Gibbs. The HMS Providence set sail at first light, and if you don't care to watch it hanging here dead with a mouth full of flies, speak now. And then Gibbs is like, take me with you. Any point of the compass. And then Barbossa's like, take you where, Gibbs? The fountain? Aye. Is that where Jack beheaded? And then Barbossa's like, have you anything you can offer me, Gibbs? Anything at all? And then, Gibbs isn't saying anything. And, while Barbossa was talking to Gibbs, Groves and Gillette have kind of fashioned this noose. And Barbossa's like, upon my naked word, you'll not see the dawn. Then out of his pocket, Gibbs grabs the Mao Kun map that he took from Jack, and he unrolls it, and Barbossa sees it. And he's like, hand it over. And then he kind of gestures to kind of give it to Barbossa, but he throws it on the ground, and he grabs the lantern and throws the lantern onto the Mao Kun, and it lights it on fire, and he's burning the Mao Kun map, and Barbossa's like, you fool! And then Gibbs is like, I had just enough time to study those infernal circles. Every route, every destination, all safe in here. And then Barbossa just says, welcome back to His Majesty's Navy, Master Gibbs. And then we have one last shot of the Mao Kun burning away. And that is the end of the Mao Kun map. Can you believe it? A map that was around for hundreds of years, for centuries, gone now. Which, it is pretty sad to see it go, just because I love that map so much. But this also means that Gibbs is the most important person in Pirates of the Caribbean currently at this moment. Because he knows everything on that map. And also, how much time did he have to study it? Because he said I had just enough time to study everything. There's so much stuff on that map. How did he get through everything. And like, Gibbs must have like a galaxy brain or something to have all that information in there. Because if I was in that position, I would have forgotten almost everything on that map already. But like, that means Gibbs is like the most valuable person in this universe right now. Like, he knows everything on that map. He is so valuable to anyone. So of course Barbossa cannot refuse that. So he brings Gibbs along on his venture. And with that, the Mao Kun map burns away, and Jack wakes up on creaking in a hammock on deck of a ship. And he's kind of thrown out of this hammock, and the one sailor's like, "Shove a leg, sailor," and then Jack's like, "Aye, sir," and then he looks confused for a second. He's like, "What?" And then he gets up and he finds that he is somewhere where he did not expect to be, and we'll find out where Jack Sparrow has ended up on the next episode. So we'll end it here. We're already really into this episode. Currently 80 minutes before I've edited any of this. So we'll end this episode here. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Hope you are happy the podcast is back. I'm happy to be back and covering finally On Streeter Tides and Dead Men Tell No Tales. I'm just very excited to be back. Back with the podcast, back talking about more Pirates of the Caribbean. It's just a lot of fun. I love these movies so much. I love this universe so much. And I'm happy I get to talk about it to a bunch of people who also enjoy Pirates of the Caribbean. So that always just makes me so happy. So if you've enjoyed this episode, if you've enjoyed any episode of the podcast, please consider leaving a rating or review on whatever platform you are listening on. Ratings and reviews, they help podcasts so much, boosts them up in the searches so more people can find them easier, and also just helps the podcast become more well known. And I want to get to as many Pirates of the Caribbean fans as possible to connect with the Pirates of the Caribbean community, because it's very like secluded, the Pirates community. So it's cool to kind of bring everyone together to kind of talk about it, and potentially await Pirates 6. So it would be great to be on a Pirates 6 hype journey with all of you if that ever happens. So that'll be cool if that ever happens. But for now, thank you so much for listening to this episode. We'll be continuing our journey through On Streeter Tides on the next episode. And then once we get through On Streeter Tides, we'll be moving into Dead Men Tell No Tales. So very excited to get through these movies. So I hope you are excited to continue listening and continue our voyage to the Fountain of Youth. Thank you so much for listening. I will see you on the next episode. Goodbye for now. Podcast of the Caribbean is in no way affiliated with Disney. If you want to send me an email or a question, you can send it over to podcastofthecaribbean@gmail.com. You can also follow this podcast on Twitter @podcastpotc and over on Instagram @Podcast of the Caribbean. I post fun content, other trivia over there, so make sure you go check those out. But be sure to keep a weather eye on the horizon, and always remember, dead men tell no tales.